In September 1987, America was stunned when a company once celebrated as a symbol of success suddenly collapsed. Tens of millions of dollars in investor money vanished almost overnight, and federal investigators immediately launched an inquiry. What shocked the public even more was that the mastermind behind it wasn't a seasoned businessman. It was Barry Minkow, born on March 22, 1966, who had started the carpet cleaning company ZZZZ Best at just 16 years old. In only a few years, he convinced banks, investors, and even auditors that he was running a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So how did a teenager manage to fool America's financial system? Let's go back to where it all began. And if you enjoy true stories like this, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story. The 16-year-old who wanted to become a millionaire. To understand how Barry Minkow went on to orchestrate one of the most infamous corporate frauds in American history, we have to go back years before the name ZZZZ Best ever appeared on Wall Street. Barry Minkow was born on March 22, 1966, in California, United States. He grew up in an ordinary family with no special background in business or finance. From an early age, Barry was fascinated by successful entrepreneurs and dreamed of becoming a millionaire while he was still young. In the early 1980s, while most teenagers his age were focused on school and extracurricular activities, Barry spent much of his time figuring out how to make money. He believed that with enough hard work and the ability to seize opportunities, he could build a successful business despite having little experience. In 1982, at just 16 years old, Barry founded a carpet cleaning company called ZZZZ Best. The name was chosen for a very strategic reason. He wanted his business to appear at the top of the alphabetical listings and local telephone directories, where customers typically search for nearby services. It was a simple but highly effective marketing strategy in an era long before the internet became part of everyday life. At first, ZZZZ Best handled only small residential carpet cleaning jobs throughout Southern California. Barry personally searched for customers, promoted the company's services, and took part in many of the day-to-day operations himself. The business was small, underfunded, and forced to compete with dozens of established carpet cleaning companies in the area. But Barry possessed one remarkable advantage. He was exceptionally confident and had a natural talent for persuading people. Despite his young age, he carried himself like an experienced businessman. He dressed professionally, spoke with confidence, and consistently convinced customers and business associates that his company was growing at an extraordinary pace. As time went on, the number of contracts began to increase, and the company's revenue showed signs of steady improvement. Yet behind those early successes, the pressure continued to mount. Barry wasn't satisfied with owning a small carpet cleaning business. His ambition was to build a company that would become known across the United States. That ambition pushed him to set goals far beyond what the business could realistically achieve. He wanted faster growth, greater profits, and the chance to prove that even a teenager could succeed in a highly competitive world of business. But when the company's actual growth failed to match the expectations Barry had created for himself, he found himself facing a critical decision. Should he continue building the company slowly and legitimately, or take another path in pursuit of rapid success? That decision marked the moment ZZZZ Best began heading in a completely different direction. After founding ZZZZ Best in 1982, Barry Minkow devoted nearly all of his time to growing the company. During the day, he worked alongside his employees, traveling from house to house providing carpet cleaning services. At night, he returned to the office to keep the books, answer phone calls, search for new customers, and plan the next day's schedule. At just 16 years old, Barry wasn't simply the company's founder. He handled almost every aspect of the business himself. He was the salesman, the manager, and one of the technicians performing the work. His days often stretched from early morning until late at night. Thanks to aggressive marketing and a proactive approach to finding customers, ZZZZ Best began winning more contracts each month. The company's revenue gradually increased, reinforcing Barry's belief that he could transform a small local business into a major company in a relatively short time. But behind that growth was a very different reality. Operating costs continued to climb. The company had to purchase additional carpet cleaning equipment, cleaning chemicals, service vehicles, and pay wages to its first employees. Every new contract generated revenue, but it also placed even greater pressure on the company's cash flow. Barry soon realized that relying solely on residential carpet cleaning jobs would never deliver the rapid growth he envisioned. At that pace, it could take years before ZZZZ Best became the kind of company he dreamed of building. Determined to outgrow his competitors, Barry began studying how larger companies expanded their operations, secured financing, and attracted investors. The more he learned, the more captivated he became by the idea of building a multimillion-dollar business. That was when his attention shifted to a market with contracts far more lucrative than residential carpet cleaning. Insurance-funded fire and property damage restoration. To Barry, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to take ZZZZ Best to an entirely new level, but that decision would also become the turning point that changed the course of his life, and ultimately set the stage for one of the most notorious corporate fraud cases in American history. By 1983, ZZZZ Best was no longer just a small business serving a handful of local customers. The company was becoming increasingly well-known throughout Southern California, and Barry Minkow believed he had already proven that he could successfully run a business at just 17 years old. But the more the company grew, the more Barry realized an important reality. Residential carpet cleaning jobs provided a steady source of income, but each contract was relatively small. To increase revenue, ZZZZ Best had to complete a large number of jobs every day, which meant hiring more employees, purchasing additional equipment, and expanding its fleet of service vehicles. It was a business model that required years of steady growth before it could become a major company. Barry began searching for a different path. While studying the market, he became interested in an industry that was expanding rapidly across the United States in the early 1980s. Insurance restoration, the business of restoring properties damaged by fire, flooding, and other insured losses. Unlike residential carpet cleaning jobs, which typically generated only a few hundred or a few thousand dollars, insurance restoration projects could be worth tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. These projects often lasted for weeks or even months, with payments made by insurance companies after property owners' claims had been approved. To Barry, it looked like an entirely new opportunity. If ZZZZ Best could break into this market, the company's revenue could grow far faster than it ever could by relying solely on traditional carpet cleaning services. Barry devoted more and more time to learning how restoration companies operated. He studied their workflow, how they secured contracts with general contractors, how they coordinated with insurance companies, and how successful firms expanded their operations in this highly profitable industry. To customers and business associates, Barry remained an ambitious young entrepreneur who always projected confidence and endless energy. Few people realized that the man leading this fast-growing company was still only a teenager. The more he learned about the industry, the more convinced he became that it would be the breakthrough that would take ZZZZ Best to the next level. But from that point forward, the gap between what the company was actually achieving and what Barry Minkow wanted people to believe began to grow wider and wider. That growing pressure would ultimately lead him to the most important decision of his life. By 1984, Barry Minkow no longer saw ZZZZ Best as just a carpet cleaning company. After spending months researching the insurance restoration industry, he became convinced that it offered the kind of explosive growth he had always envisioned for his business. Barry began actively reaching out to companies that specialized in restoring properties damaged by fire and flooding. He closely observed how they organized their operations, managed job sites, coordinated large crews, and worked with insurance companies throughout the claims process. Every visit gave him a better understanding of how this lucrative industry operated. What impressed Barry the most wasn't the number of restoration projects. It was the size of the contracts. A single restoration job could last for weeks, employ dozens of workers, and generate far more revenue than dozens of residential carpet cleaning jobs combined. To Barry, it became obvious that if ZZZZ Best could break into this market, the company's future would change dramatically. After returning to his office, Barry began reshaping the company's long-term strategy. He devoted more time to positioning ZZZZ Best as a business capable of handling large-scale commercial restoration projects rather than simply being known as a residential carpet cleaning service. During this period, Barry also worked aggressively to expand his professional network. He attended meetings with business owners, general contractors, and professionals in the construction and property restoration industries. Barry understood that before a company could win major contracts, it first had to earn the trust of potential clients and business partners. With his confidence, charisma, and polished professional image, Barry consistently made a strong impression on people he met for the first time. Few realized that the young man discussing projects worth hundreds of thousands of dollars was only 18 years old. But the more business relationships he built, the more he felt a different kind of pressure beginning to grow. To be recognized as a major company, ZZZZ Best needed more than quality work. It needed to project the image of a large, successful business, one that customers, banks, and business partners would trust to handle major restoration contracts. That way of thinking gradually began to reshape Barry's approach to building his company. And before long, The line between creating a successful corporate image and convincing people that ZZZZ Best was much larger than it actually was became increasingly blurred. 1984 and early 1985, Barry Minkow was spending most of his time pushing ZZZZ Best deeper into the insurance restoration industry. His goal was no longer to win more small residential carpet cleaning jobs, but to secure restoration contracts worth tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. To Barry, this represented an opportunity to completely transform the company's future. He attended meeting after meeting with general contractors, construction firms, and professionals in the property restoration industry. Barry worked tirelessly to expand his professional network because he understood that in this business, reputation and relationships were nearly as important as the ability to perform the work itself. Meanwhile, ZZZZ Best continued operating its carpet cleaning business, which remained the company's primary source of revenue. But Barry devoted more and more of his time and resources to positioning ZZZZ Best as a company capable of handling large-scale insurance restoration projects. He invested in more polished marketing materials, prepared professional company profiles, and constantly searched for opportunities to reach larger and more influential clients. The people who met Barry during this period. He appeared to be a confident young entrepreneur with exceptional communication skills and a clear vision for ZZZZ Best's *** future. That confidence helped him earn the trust of prospective business partners and investors. But behind that confident image, Barry knew the company was still far smaller than the business he was trying to portray. Every time he walked into a meeting with established companies, he became increasingly aware of the gap between ZZZZ Best's actual capabilities and the expectations of the people sitting across the table. The pressure to grow faster continued to build. Barry had no intention of waiting years for ZZZZ Best to expand the way most companies did. He became convinced that if he missed this opportunity, his company might never catch up with competitors that were already well established in the marketplace. That belief gradually changed the way he thought about building a business. Instead of focusing solely on creating a successful company, Barry began thinking more about how to convince others that his company had already become one. It was a subtle shift in mindset, but it was at that moment that Barry Minkow's story began taking a dramatically different direction. By 1985, Barry Minkow's ambitions had grown even bigger. After spending months studying the insurance restoration industry, he was convinced that it represented the future of ZZZZ Best. What he lacked wasn't confidence. It was the large-scale projects needed to prove to the marketplace that his company could compete with the industry's established leaders. Barry continued meeting with general contractors, construction companies, and professionals in the property restoration business. He presented ZZZZ Best as a rapidly expanding company that was ready to take on larger and more complex restoration projects. But reality didn't unfold the way Barry had hoped. Most high-value restoration contracts were awarded to companies with years of experience and proven track records. For a young business like ZZZZ Best, winning projects of that size was incredibly difficult. Barry soon found himself trapped in a frustrating cycle. To land major contracts, the company needed experience. But to gain that experience, it first had to be given the opportunity to handle major contracts. IT was a challenge that nearly every new business faced. Meanwhile, the pressure inside the company continued to grow. Barry wanted revenue to increase faster. He wanted to expand operations. Above all, he wanted ZZZZ Best to become a nationally recognized company as quickly as possible. But time wasn't on his side. With every month that passed without securing a major restoration contract, Barry felt he was falling further behind the future he had imagined. It was during this period that he began thinking more seriously about how banks, investors, and business partners perceive ZZZZ Best as a restoration company. At first, those thoughts were simply about building credibility, but before long, Barry realized that relying solely on real accomplishments would take many years to create the image he wanted. And that was when a dangerous idea began to take shape if reality wasn't impressive enough. Could the company's image get there first? It was a question that would change Barry Minkow's life forever and set the stage for one of the most infamous corporate fraud cases in American history. By mid-1985, Barry Minkow realized that ZZZZ Best was unlikely to secure major insurance restoration contracts based solely on the company's actual experience and capabilities. Despite attending numerous meetings, expanding his network, and aggressively promoting the business, the most valuable projects continued to go to competitors with years of established experience. Barry began to believe that if he kept waiting, ZZZZ Best would miss its opportunity to grow. In his mind, the problem wasn't his ability to run the company. It was that the market simply didn't trust a business that was still so young. It was at this point that Barry made the first decision that crossed an ethical line. Instead of demonstrating only what ZZZZ Best had actually accomplished, he began looking for ways to convince business partners that the company had already been involved in far larger property restoration projects than it really had. At first, Barry viewed these changes as nothing more than a way to bridge the gap between where the company was and where he believed it would soon be. In reality, however, it marked the beginning of an increasingly complex pattern of deception. Barry began portraying ZZZZ Best as a company managing multiple high-value restoration projects. The company's marketing materials placed greater and greater emphasis on its property restoration business, leading many people to believe that restoration had already become its primary line of business. The new image of ZZZZ Best quickly had an impact. Some investors, banks, and business partners began to see Barry in a completely different light. They no longer saw a small carpet cleaning company in California. Instead, they saw a fast-growing young business thriving in one of the country's most promising industries. That shift in perception only strengthened Barry's belief that he was on the right path. He was no longer focused solely on building a successful company. He had begun trying to maintain the image he had created, and from that moment forward, every new decision forced Barry to go further than the one before it. The road back to the truth was becoming more difficult with every step. By late 1985, Barry Minkow realized that projecting a professional image was no longer enough. If banks, investors, and auditors were going to place their trust in ZZZZ Best, the company needed to demonstrate that it was actively managing large insurance restoration projects. That was something ZZZZ Best did not actually have. According to court records, it was during this period that Barry became involved in creating fictitious restoration projects. To make the scheme believable, Barry did far more than simply make claims. Together with others involved, he helped create a network of documents, locations, and supporting stories designed to convince anyone conducting an inspection that ZZZZ Best was managing multiple property restoration projects worth millions of dollars. One of the key pieces of the scheme was a company called Interstate Appraisal Services. On paper, it was presented as an independent company responsible for overseeing or managing the restoration projects that ZZZZ Best was supposedly performing, but according to investigators' later findings, Interstate Appraisal Services did not operate as a genuinely independent business. Its existence provided another layer of legitimacy, making the transactions between ZZZZ Best and the supposed restoration projects appear credible to banks, auditors, and investors. Piece by piece, the scheme began to come together. The documents were prepared, the information was carefully organized, the explanations were coordinated. Everything was designed to achieve one goal. Whenever someone attempted to verify ZZZZ Best's operations, they would see exactly what Barry wanted them to see. This was no longer about promoting the company's image. It was the beginning of a system deliberately built to conceal the truth. And it was that very system that would allow ZZZZ Best to grow at a pace that captured the attention of Wall Street before the entire deception unraveled in a remarkably short period of time. By early 1987, the first cracks in the empire Barry Minkow had spent years building began to appear. For months, ZZZZ Best had continued releasing impressive financial reports. The company was praised by the media as one of the fastest-growing businesses in the United States. Its stock price continued to rise, and investor confidence showed little sign of weakening. But behind those impressive numbers, more and more people were beginning to ask questions. Several investigative journalists discovered that many of the insurance restoration projects ZZZZ Best claimed to be managing could not be independently verified. As they attempted to confirm information with property owners and other parties involved, inconsistencies began to emerge. Those suspicions quickly spread throughout the financial community. Banks, investors, and especially auditors began demanding more thorough verification of the contracts that accounted for most of the company's reported revenue. The deeper they looked, the more irregularities they uncovered. According to the findings of the subsequent investigation, many of the restoration contracts used to support the company's reported revenue simply did not exist as ZZZZ Best had claimed. The network of documents and verification procedures that had previously allowed Barry to withstand repeated scrutiny was no longer enough to conceal the truth. As the first reports appear in the media, the market reacted almost immediately. Investors began dumping the stock. ZZZZ Best's market value collapsed in a matter of days. A company once valued at hundreds of millions of dollars was suddenly on the brink of total collapse. Shortly afterward, the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) launched a formal investigation into ZZZZ Best. Not long after, the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) joined the investigation as evidence pointed to multiple violations involving securities fraud and other financial crimes. Federal investigators quickly gathered company records, interviewed witnesses, and examined extensive documentation related to the restoration projects the company had publicly reported. The evidence became increasingly overwhelming. The empire Barry Minkow had built over several years began to crumble piece by piece. Eventually, Barry Minkow was arrested and charged with multiple federal offenses, including securities fraud, bank fraud, mail fraud, and several other financial crimes under U.S. federal law in an astonishingly short period of time. Barry went from being celebrated as America's most successful young entrepreneur to becoming the central figure in one of the largest corporate fraud scandals in U.S. history. But his arrest was only the beginning. Waiting for Barry was a federal trial that would determine the price he would pay for an empire built on lies. After months of investigation, Barry Minkow finally stood trial in federal court in one of the most shocking corporate fraud cases in American history. Faced with the evidence gathered by the FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC), and federal prosecutors, the entire scheme of fictitious contracts, inflated revenue, and non-existent insurance restoration projects was gradually exposed in court. The very claims that had once made ZZZZ Best a Wall Street success story had now become the evidence used against its founder. Barry ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple federal financial fraud charges. The court concluded that his actions had caused substantial losses to investors, banks, and the stock market. In 1988, Barry Minkow was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. At the time the sentence was handed down, the man once celebrated as America's teenage business prodigy was only in his early 20s. The career he had built in just a few short years had completely collapsed. Barry's first days in federal prison were a tremendous shock. He went from being a businessman who regularly appeared on television, met with investors, and ran a publicly traded company to becoming a federal inmate required to follow every rule of the U.S. prison system. Barry later said that it was during those years behind bars that he began reflecting on the decisions that had led him to that point. After serving part of his sentence, Barry was released early under the federal prison system's rules. Returning to life outside prison, he declared that he wanted to start over. He studied theology, became a pastor, and frequently spoke publicly about the mistakes he had made. He shared the story of ZZZZ Best at universities, businesses, and financial organizations as a cautionary tale about the consequences of corporate fraud. Barry didn't stop there. He went on to establish an organization dedicated to investigating and exposing companies suspected of financial fraud. For years, he worked with investors, attorneys, and government authorities to analyze businesses suspected of manipulating financial statements or defrauding shareholders. To many people, he became proof that someone who had made serious mistakes could genuinely change and rebuild their life. Barry's public image gradually transformed. Instead of being remembered solely as the central figure in a notorious corporate fraud, he became a frequent speaker who appeared in the media discussing business ethics and weaknesses in the financial oversight system. Many people came to believe that Barry Minkow had truly redeemed himself for the mistakes he had made as a young man. But Barry's story was far from over. Just as many believe he had finally turned the page on his past, another chapter unfolded, one that threatened to destroy the image of a reformed man he had spent years rebuilding. For many years after his release from prison, Barry Minkow was regarded by many as one of the rare success stories of true rehabilitation. He appeared on television, spoke at universities and business conferences, and investigated companies suspected of financial fraud. Reports published by Barry often caused the stock prices of the companies he investigated to fall sharply, further strengthening his reputation as a respected corporate fraud expert. But in 2011, everything changed. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, federal prosecutors accused Barry of participating in a scheme to manipulate the stock price of Lennar Corporation, one of the largest home-building companies in the United States at the time. Investigators concluded that Barry publicly released negative information about the company while secretly maintaining a financial interest in seeing its stock price decline. What made the case especially shocking was that Barry was operating as a corporate fraud investigator when the scheme took place. The very credibility he had spent years rebuilding after his release from prison became part of the new criminal scheme. In federal court, Barry Minkow ultimately pleaded guilty to charges related to securities manipulation. The court found that he had intentionally used his reputation to influence the market for personal financial gain. Once again, Barry was sentenced to federal prison. For many people who had believed Barry had genuinely changed, the case came as a devastating shock. The image of the man who had stood before audiences warning others about financial fraud was almost completely destroyed, but that was still not the end. After completing his sentence for the securities manipulation case, Barry became the subject of yet another criminal investigation. This time, the case had nothing to do with Wall Street or publicly traded companies. Instead, it centered on Community Bible Church in San Diego, where he had served as a pastor. According to federal charging documents, Barry was accused of embezzling money and using church donations for his personal benefit. Following the investigation, he once again pleaded guilty in federal court. Once again, Barry Minkow was convicted of financial fraud. By that point, the image of a reformed man that Barry had spent nearly 2 decades building had all but disappeared. The man who had once been held up as proof that people could overcome the mistakes of their past had once again returned to a life of crime. As a result, Barry Minkow's story became far more than the story of an ordinary corporate fraud. It serves as a reminder that true change is not measured by words or by success during a single chapter of life, but by the choices a person continues to make over an entire lifetime.